Well, hello and welcome. This is Pastor Ken Ortize, and I want to thank you for joining me in these daily devotionals. We do them Monday through Friday every week, and it's kind of a way of us engaging in somewhat of a conversation, although I realize it's actually a monologue and you're following along. But I hope that it creates a conversation, at least in your own mind, or if you're sitting down as a husband and wife, as many people I have discovered do, that this would lead to a conversation about some of the issues we address here, because there's value in understanding concepts and ideas, but it's really the working through of those things through conversation and practice that makes them really weave into the fabric of our life in a way that it becomes to show outwardly in a very life-changing way. So the Christian life, as I've said many times before, isn't something that's meant to be lived in isolation. Although I get it. I mean, I deal with enough blowback in ministry that I understand how attractive it is to really not want to be involved or engage with other people on any deep level. But the reality is that that's kind of the heavy lifting of the Christian life that makes a difference. You know, one of the things I discover as I get older is I can find the sedentary life to be really attractive, especially if you live in this part of the country where just going outside at least 4 months of the year, if not more, is pretty unattractive. I mean, here we are in April and we still are having snowfall, which is pretty depressing, to be quite honest. But to say all of that, it's easy to kind of just hunker down and, you know, and sit around and read a book or watch a movie or do something that's non-engaging. And that kind of leads obviously to some physical unfitness. And when you get to my age group, sitting around doing nothing is not really in your best interest. The longer you can stay active and engaged, the healthier and the better you're going to feel overall. A lot less depression and a lot less physical limitations. But having said that, this really is a parallel that Paul is drawing here between physical activity and spiritual maturity or spiritual health in our life, where he says, you know, instead of spending your time, as we talked about last time, on godless myths and old wives' fables, he said, instead, train yourself to be godly. And the word train that he uses here is kind of a fun word. It comes from a root word gumnos, which means naked. And the word gumnazo, that is translated train here, in its first and original meaning, as it was used in the centuries before the scriptures were written, it meant to exercise naked. And so in the ancient Greek games, when they competed in their games or they worked out in their gymnasiums, they basically didn't wear any clothes. At least the guys didn't. Women weren't allowed to participate. But the point was that they did that. And even the ancient Spartans used to go to war without wearing any pants or any kind of covering at all. So they went into combat very vulnerable in my opinion. But nonetheless, the term really meant that originally. But what it really meant by the time Paul was talking about it is the idea of somebody going out and exercising vigorously. Because the guys who went and worked out in the gymnasiums or in these large arenas, they trained very hard. They trained every day. I mean, it's a lot along the lines of the gladiators who spent their whole life training in physical fitness and in physical combat. And these were people who, like a professional athlete today, took themselves very seriously. And so in the same way that we understand that professional athletes today have to dedicate them in diet and in exercise and even mental conditioning to be able to compete against other athletes to win the title, Paul is really borrowing that term and saying we need to view our spiritual lives, our godliness, in that same light. And it's really pretty challenging, because I was just thinking today, my wife and I, we were praying today, and there's a period in which the sun was out and we were sitting on our deck praying in the sunlight. And I thought to myself, you know, the Bible talks a lot about the hardships and sufferings of the Christian life. And I really began to wonder, especially as I was reading some reports on what the church in the Ukraine is going through right now, how much suffering and hardship I have gone through or have not, and how much I have to learn in that regard. And I don't say that because I want to invite suffering into my life, but there's something about suffering that produces a depth of spirituality. It's almost like the less we can depend upon ourselves or anyone or anything else, the more vigorously we become attentive to the things of the Spirit. I was thinking today in my own private time with the Lord, I was thinking about how that, in fact, to be honest, I was just reading Nehemiah's, the prayer of repentance in Nehemiah chapter 10 or 11, can't remember exactly. But it was really struck me how that in the prayer, there was all this ownership of sin, past, present, and future. And I realized that until we're able to or willing to admit that something sucks in our life really bad, and then we secondly recognize it's our own fault, the sooner we begin to understand what it means to walk in repentance. Because there's a lot of times we become upset about the way things are working out in our life, and we immediately focus on the vehicle that may have come from, or the person who we believe is responsible, or persons, and we can become very bitter and hateful and towards that person. But part of the thing we don't realize is that nothing can touch you unless God lets it to touch you. He allows it into your life, and so it's there for a reason. It's not there by accident. If God didn't want you to be touched by that, it wouldn't be able to touch you. So I'm going through this hardship, and God's bringing me this hardship for a reason. And the challenge for me is to really ask the right questions. Why, God, are you allowing me to go through this? What is it you're trying to say to me? What are you trying to teach me? And sometimes it can be something as simple as just simply saying, God, I thank you in all circumstances. I'm somehow going to work through this to the point where I can find joy in what I'm going through and begin to appreciate the work that it's doing in my life, as opposed to what is more typical and more habitual for me as a human being, where I basically want to become bitter, resentful, and even we can progress to the point of being malicious. That's the idea of we start figuring out ways that we can settle the score and get even. This is really where the heavy lifting comes in the Christian life. I mean, being in the Word and being in prayer are two disciplines that are key to growing in our spiritual life, but it's the application of the things that we have learned that is really where we get our deepest and most difficult training. And I find that many Christians leave those things somewhat disconnected. I mean, they may read the Bible, they may pray, they may fellowship with other people and go to church and do the kind of things that are part and parcel of what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ. But when it comes to enduring hardships as a good soldier of Jesus Christ, the way that Paul put it in 2 Timothy 2, we don't make the connection. I mean, we forget about everything we've read and learned and been taught, and we begin to focus on the wrong that was done to us. When Jesus said that we should love our enemies in the Sermon on the Mount, we should pray for those who despitefully use us. I find that it's really easy for me to memorize that. It's really easy for me to repeat that. What is really, really hard is to actually do that. To actually where I'm getting down and I'm praying God's blessing on people who I don't feel have treated me fairly, and and really responding to them in a way that expresses the love of God. So this is a struggle we have because we live in such a self-protective culture, and a culture that spends increasingly large amounts of time in isolation and separation, that the application part is really something that leaves us kind of withered and scrawny. That when I was a kid, they had Mr. Atlas commercials in the comic books, or advertisement of the comic book, that you could sign up for his program, and instead of being a 90-pound weakling that people kick sand in your face, you'd become strong like Mr. Atlas, and nobody would touch you because you had such large pectoral muscles. Well, the reality is that, in a way, many of us as Christians can become like that. We're very knowledgeable in the right diet. We can tell people what kind of exercises they should be doing. But the reality is, when it comes to the application, we have very, very little experience because we've been able to structure our life in a way where hurt doesn't touch us. And when we do get hurt, we end up nursing our hurts. In fact, I have a blog that I wrote on my website, kenortize.com. I entitled it that, Hoarding Our Hurts. And if that's something that you're struggling with, you're feeling hurt and offended by people, and you basically are closing yourself off, you may want to read that little blog article. It may be helpful to you, because I think it's something that is becoming increasingly common and let me say, I completely understand it, but long term, it's not the healthiest choice we can make. But we'll continue this conversation tomorrow. I look forward to doing just that. God bless you and go in His grace.